I'm Mr. Beat. I'm here at Zion, the place where some people believed Jesus Christ would return to earth. Now, how do we know that this is the place where the second coming of Christ would happen? Some dude said God told him it was. Where am I? Well, before I tell you exactly where I am, I will give you a hint. I'm somewhere in the United States, which means this video is about, yep, you guessed it, the Mormons. Mormonism describes the beliefs and traditions of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Well, most of them. Mormons are both a religious and cultural group related to Mormonism. Some of them don't like to call themselves Mormon, I should mention. And some of the nicest people I have ever met in my entire life are Mormon. I know it's a stereotype, but gosh darn it, the stereotype is true. They're darn good people. I love them. That said, you might be surprised to hear that the Latter-day Saint movement is one of the newest religions. It's only been around for less than 200 years, which is not much longer than I've been around, yo. And I've been around. But despite only being around for less than 200 years, more than 17 million people around the world currently follow the Latter-day Saint movement. Whether it's because of the Book of Mormon musical that the South Park guys created, or the common sight of missionaries like these guys knocking on your doors, you have probably already heard of Mormonism, especially if you're an American. So why did Mormonism become such a big deal? Well, it can all be traced back to this one smooth-talking dude. More on him in a bit. Here's the story of Mormonism, a uniquely American religion.
Go on one of these planets. Through obedience to Mormon teaching and death and resurrection, he proved himself worthy.
Peter, what are all these women doing in our living room?
Well, I wish I took your advice and picked a new religion. I'm gonna be a Mormon.
A Mormon? Are you sure?
You don't drink, you don't never taken drugs, you don't smoke, you're a family man. I mean, you're pretty perfect, aren't you?
Well, I think people would, particularly my family, would disagree with that conclusion.
Some believe that such a confession of my faith will sink my candidacy. If they're right, so be it.
Therefore, they did watch over their people and did nourish them with things pertaining to righteousness. What's up? What's good?
I was a totally strict and devout Protestant. I thought we went to heaven. Yes, well, I'm afraid you were wrong.
I was a practicing Jehovah's Witness.
You picked the wrong religion as well.
Well, who was right? Who gets into heaven?
I'm afraid it was the Mormons. Yes, the Mormons were the correct answer.
Before we get into it, this video is once again sponsored by Ground News. Ground News has been a constant sponsor of mine because I truly believe in it. I regularly use it as a way to get out of my echo chambers and see how different media outlets spin different stories. Let me show you an example, eh? We have a story here about President-elect Donald Trump appointing Tom Homan as border czar to lead immigration crackdown. 148 news sources have covered the story, 24 leaning left, 26 leaning right, 36 in the center. The bias distribution is 42% of the sources are from the center, 52% of the sources are high factuality, and 13% of the sources are independent news. Now, what I find most fascinating are the headline differences. On the left here, Rolling Stone magazine says, Trump taps family separation mastermind to be border czar. Now, compare that to a headline on the right saying, Tom Homan tells sanctuary city leaders, get out of the way, because we're coming. Quite a difference there. I also like the blind spot feature. You can see which stories are being covered by left-leaning news sources and right-leaning news sources. With Ground News, you develop a well-rounded worldview and see the nuance behind the headlines. Go to ground.news/Mr. Beat and click on the link to get 50% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan, which is the same plan I use, man. By subscribing, you are directly supporting an independent platform on a mission to restore facts, transparency, and trust in the news. Thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video. As I said earlier in this here motion picture, Mormonism all began with this dude. Oop. Oh, over here. This dude. Joseph Smith. Without Joseph Smith, there is no Latter-day Saint movement. Smith. What kind of last name is that? Anyway, Smith was born on December 23rd, 1805 in Vermont, one of 11 children to Lucy Smith and Joseph Smith Sr. He grew up on a farm. After years of crop failures and failed business investments, the family moved west, specifically to western New York State. Historians later called this area the Burned-Over District, in reference to all the passionate religious revivals that took place in the area that marked the Second Great Awakening, a time when a bunch of people got excited about Protestant Christianity after going to camp meetings and listening to emotional preachers. There is evidence that the Smith family got caught up in the Second Great Awakening after moving to the Burned-Over District. Joseph's mom, Lucy, especially got into it, although the Smiths apparently never fully dedicated themselves to just one religion. Joseph's dad, Joseph Sr., apparently made money as some sort of wizard. I'm not exaggerating here. He'd claim he could see things all other people couldn't see. And he'd claim he had the ability to find treasures. And people actually believed him, and they'd actually pay him to help them find these treasures. They even called it treasure hunting. Now, did Joseph Smith Sr. ever actually find any treasure? Nah, but that didn't matter. He was making money, baby. Joseph Sr. taught his son to hustle people just like he did, and soon Joseph Jr. was doing his own treasure hunts. When Joseph was about 12, he became interested in different religions, but wasn't fully satisfied with any one of them. In 1820, he told a Methodist minister that he had been praying in the woods near his home when both God and Jesus Christ appeared to him and told him his sins were forgiven. Oh, and that all Christian churches of the time had, quote, turned aside from the gospel. Well, the minister dismissed the story, basically telling Joseph he was full of crap.
I told my wife that you spoke with God and Jesus, and she didn't believe it.
Well, it's true, I did. I was asking God if I should be a Protestant or a Catholic or what, and suddenly God and Jesus appeared before me. And they said I should start my own church, because none of the others had it right. And that's exactly how it happened.
You see? You believe it now?
Well, yeah, sure. Why would he make that up?
Also, I should add that the, quote, first vision story has had multiple versions over the years. The version I shared with you was the official church version. Flash forward to September 21st, 1823. Yes, we actually have a specific date for this. That's the day Joseph said that the angel Moroni visited him and told him of a book made of golden plates, as well as a bunch of other really cool old stuff, was buried in a hill near his house. Yeah, that's the hill. Over the next 4 years, Joseph supposedly tried to find this buried book made of golden plates, but couldn't locate them. Meanwhile, Joseph got much better at pretending to find lost treasure to a point where he was able to make money for his family, who was, once again, financially struggling by this time. In 1825, a dude named Josiah Stoll hired Smith to find a lost Spanish silver mine that he believed existed near Harmony, Pennsylvania. After finding absolutely nothing, Stoll's nephew, Peter Bridgman, sued Joseph Smith. What's crazy, though, is that Stoll was still a true believer of Joseph Smith. In fact, he testified at the trial to defend Smith. It was around that time that Smith met Emma Hale while staying with her family in Harmony as he helped Stoll try to find treasure. The two fell in love. However, after Smith proposed to Emma, her father did not approve of them getting married because he didn't trust him. Well, they got married anyway, eloping on January 18th, 1827. Only after Smith promised to stop treasure hunting did Emma's dad start to come around, letting them live on his property and helping Smith start a legitimate business. But what about the golden plates? Did you forget about the golden plates? Let's once again talk about those golden plates. Supposedly, and this is obviously a pretty big supposedly, Smith returned to that hill near his old house on September 22nd, 1827, and finally was able to dig up that book of golden plates. Smith began telling everyone all about the golden plates and apparently caused a big fuss. Smith said the golden plates plates had, quote, reformed Egyptian written on them, and he was the only one who could translate it into English. But nobody could actually see the golden plates, nor could they actually see Joseph Smith translating the golden plates. Well, isn't that convenient? Later, Smith claimed he could translate the golden plates without even seeing them. He could just put his handy seer stone in his hat, bury his face in it, and the stone would light up with the words to translate. One person incredibly impressed with Smith's news of the golden plates and his ability to translate them was a rich neighbor of his back in New York named Martin Harris. Harris traveled to Harmony and began helping Smith write down the translations in April 1828. One person not impressed with Smith's translations, Harris's wife, Lucy, she asked to see the translations for herself. Harris convinced Smith to take 116 pages of the translations to show Lucy to convince her, but it was at the Harris house that the translations somehow mysteriously disappeared.
And so Joseph Smith put his head into a hat and read to me what the golden plate said. I wrote it all down and we're gonna publish it into a book.
Martin, how do you know he isn't just making stuff up and pretending he's translating off golden plates? I'm gonna hide these pages. If Joseph Smith really is translating off of golden plates, then he'll be able to do it again. But if Joseph Smith is making it all up, then the new translations will be different from these.
Okay, fine. I bet he'll have no problem.
Oh, he had a problem, all right. Okay, that's speculation now, but regardless, when Smith heard about the missing translations, this devastated him. You see, he apparently was not able to translate those first 116 pages again. Smith then said Moroni returned to him and took the golden plates away from him as punishment for letting the translations get away. Conveniently, Moroni returned the golden plates to him a few months later, and after that, both Emma and a dude named Oliver Cowdery helped him translate new stuff. The new stuff began, quote, "Thou deliverest up that which was sacred into the hands of a wicked man who has set at naught the counsels of God and has broken the most sacred promises which were made before God and has depended upon his own judgment and boasted in his own wisdom." Yes, this was in reference to Harris losing the first translations. But despite the trash talking of Harris, Harris remained steadfastly loyal to Joseph Smith and the church. This new stuff ultimately ended up being what we now call the Book of Mormon, the first important holy book of the Latter-day Saint movement. And yes, later there was a famous musical making fun of it. The golden plates, by the way, just went back to heaven after Smith was done translating. By June 1829, the Book of Mormon was complete. Smith got a publisher to make copies of it, all financed by, you guessed it, Martin Harris, who mortgaged his farm to the publisher to pay for printing costs, then later sold his farm to pay off the mortgage. Poor guy. Ever since, more than 200 million copies of the Book of Mormon have been printed. Around this time, Smith said he got another revelation from God. Hold up, I think I'm getting a revelation from God. Oh, huh. Never mind. That was just my stomach growling. Anyway, Smith said God told him that only 3 dudes would know firsthand about the existence of the golden plates. David Whitmer, the aforementioned Oliver Cowdery, and Martin Harris, obviously. I mean, the guy has money. They'd be known as the 3 Musketeers. The 3 Witnesses.
You could make a religion out of this. You can make a religion out of this. You can make a religion out of this. You can make a religion out of this.
Smith, who many already viewed as a prophet, officially founded his new church at various locations in the burned-over district on April 6th, 1830. At that time, it was simply called the Church of Christ. Smith and the 3 witnesses claimed that Native Americans had believed in Jesus Christ hundreds of years before he was even born, and that he later appeared to them after his resurrection. They also claimed that their church held the only true form of the Christian religion that went directly completely back to Jesus Christ. Harris said that anybody who didn't become a Mormon within 2 years would be kicked off of the planet. No big deal. Now, while Smith was able to quickly attract new followers to be baptized into his young church, he also attracted a lot of criticism from other Christians who said he was a charlatan. After all, many knew about Smith's earlier treasure hunting schemes. Not only that, Smith's authority began to be undermined after Cowdery, a dude named Hiram Page, and other members started to also claim to be getting revelations directly from God. In response, Smith said that only he could get revelations from God and that all those other revelations were from the devil. Soon, Smith's followers were threatened with mob violence, and Smith himself kept getting arrested. On June 30th, 1830, he got arrested for being a, quote, disorderly person. After being found innocent, he was arrested again right after his release. Due to all this, Smith decided to move his family and followers west to Kirtland, Ohio, getting there in February 1831. Meanwhile, Smith had sent Cowdery and others to Missouri to convert Native Americans to Mormonism. On the way there, Cowdery came upon a preacher named Sidney Rigdon and his more than 100 followers in northeastern Ohio. Rigdon was impressed with the Book of Mormon and within a couple weeks had declared Smith's religion the truth with a capital T, and he and his followers all became Mormons just like that, man. Back in Kirtland, Smith still kept getting arrested and still kept facing violent mobs. On March 24th, 1832, a mob broke into his house in the middle of the night, dragged him from his bedroom, tore his clothes off, beat him up, tried to poison him, and even tarred and feathered him. But Smith survived, and after that, had lots of success growing his church. By the middle of 1835, there were nearly 2,000 practicing Mormons in the area. It was in Kirtland that Smith began to become interested in polygamy, or the act of having more than one spouse at one time. Smith's friend Isaac Morley had multiple wives, and Smith was like, maybe I could pull that off too, eh? It was also in Kirtland that Smith decided he wanted to build the City of Zion, a new Jerusalem, or a holy city where they could worship freely and await the return of Christ. And where did he want that City of Zion to be? Missouri, of course. Specifically Jackson County, Missouri, which is where I'm at right now. Smith sent hundreds of Mormons to settle in Jackson County, but this freaked the locals out, and they formed militias to prevent settlement. Plus, many Mormons ended up dying of cholera there. Long story short, the City of Zion didn't work out, and many Mormons fled to nearby Clay County. In March 1836, back in Kirtland, Smith led a dedication of Kirtland Temple, the first Mormon temple. In January 1837, Smith and other church leaders created the Kirtland Safety Society, a company that at one time issued currency. Well, Smith and several Kirtland Safety Society associates later got accused of fraud, and once again the locals were mad at Smith for stealing their money. Not only that, but Smith and Cowdery were now bitter enemies, especially after Cowdery said Smith was having an affair with his teenage maid. So it was time for Smith to bail again. This time, Smith headed to Missouri himself, along with Sidney Rigdon and a new group of Mormons settling in Caldwell County. Specifically in a place called Far West, which is where I'm at right now. That's right. I've been here the whole time, and you didn't even notice. Caldwell County was supposed to be a safe haven for Mormons, but some of them still lived outside the county, leading to more tensions with non-Mormon settlers. After non-Mormons wouldn't allow Mormons to vote on August 6, 1838, a big fight broke out, leading to a siege of the town of DeWitt, ultimately leading to all Mormons living there getting kicked out and a wider conflict known as the 1838 Mormon War. It was during this war that the Missouri government arrested Smith and charged him with treason. Behind me is a building, but inside that building is the actual jail where Joseph Smith and his brother spent more than 4 months. I'll put the footage on the screen right now. You're looking at it. The tour guide inside was telling me that the guards all loved Joseph Smith. Smith and his crew supposedly were able to escape after bribing the guards with whiskey, although they were probably going to let him free anyway. Oh yeah, we're in Liberty, Missouri now. This is Liberty. See, look at that. Freedom. The 1838 Mormon War culminated with Missouri Governor Lilburn Boggs issuing Missouri Executive Order 44, aka the Extermination Order, which kicked all Mormons out of the state. If they didn't leave, they'd be killed. 21 Mormons died during the war, including 17 at what became known as Hans Mills Massacre. The Mormon refugees fled back east to Illinois. They soon established a new settlement along the banks of the Mississippi River, calling it Nauvoo. Smith became the town's mayor, of course. One of the notable settlers of Nauvoo, Brigham Young. He had been with the Latter-day Saint movement since Kirtland, and by now was one of the church's most influential leaders. At Nauvoo, the Mormon church prospered and gained national attention. Not all of it good. Smith was also able to attract a few more rich and influential converts, like this dude, John Bennett. Smith planned the construction of the church's second temple, the Nauvoo Temple. It wouldn't be completed until 1846, and even then was only actually used for less than 3 months. More on that in a bit. It was also in Nauvoo that the church began to change some of its doctrines. One of those doctrines? Plural marriage. Yep, polygamy was now more accepted among Mormons. And Brigham Young, who at one time had as many as 56 wives and 57 children, led the wedding ceremonies, which Mormons called sealing ordinances, of 2 of Smith's plural wives in 1842. Smith would have as many as 49 wives himself before his death, with some getting married to him as young as 14 years old. Ugh. Perhaps due to all the polygamy, by the end of 1842, popular opinion had turned against Mormonism. Oh, here we go again. As more and more of the locals turned against Nauvoo's residents, Smith went to the United States Congress to try to get it to make Nauvoo an independent territory with the right to get protection from federal troops. After Congress didn't respond, he was like, fine, I'll run for president of the United States, running in the election of 1844. No joke. Not only that, he started his own militia and a group called the Council of 50, established to decide which national or state laws Mormons should obey and which ones they should ignore. It also set the framework for a Mormon government. By the time of Joseph Smith's presidential campaign, the population of Nauvoo had swelled to 12,000, making it the second most populous city in Illinois after Chicago. However, Smith's presidential campaign ended. Because he died. After newspapers published negative stories about Smith and Mormons, Smith ordered his militia to destroy one newspaper's printing press. Well, this led to more people getting upset, and long story short, Smith and his brother Hiram got in trouble for inciting a riot and eventually were charged with treason in Carthage, Illinois. On June 27th, 1844, an armed mob stormed the jail Smith and Hiram were in and killed them. Mormons everywhere, and by this time they were expanding into Europe, were devastated by the news of the death of Joseph Smith. Their prophet had died. Most non-Mormon newspapers, however, described Smith as a religious fanatic. Not only that, there was no clear person to take Smith's place as the leader of the church, leading to a power vacuum. Well, Brigham Young seized the moment, making himself the new leader of the church. And most everyone pretty much went along with it. That said, not everyone went along with Young, and after Smith's death, several groups splintered to form their own denominations. The largest of these was the Community of Christ, which today is based in Independence, Missouri. That's their temple, just a couple blocks from Harry Truman's house, as a matter of fact. Anyway, by 1846, the violence on Mormons was only getting worse. Due to the escalation of conflicts between Mormons and other Illinois residents, Brigham Young decided to lead his followers west to a place where they could practice their religion in peace. As it so happens, the United States was about to win a war with Mexico and gain all of this territory. Holy crap. Yeah, Young figured some of that land should work as a new place for them to settle. And so they headed west. Following what is today simply known as the Mormon Trail, they traveled 1,300 miles into the western frontier. When they arrived in what is now Utah in the summer of 1847, the Mexican-American War was still going on. The land still belonged to Mexico, but it might have been obvious that the land would soon be under American control as Mexico's capital was about to be captured.
So in 1846, when the Mormons started going away from Nauvoo, they were trying to get away from America, but in the meantime, America came to them instead. Brigham Young was kind of obliged to send an entire battalion down to help conquer Mexico. And so this was the Mormon Battalion. They had to go from winter quarters, which is kind of in Nebraska today, and go all the way down into New Mexico and then across the desert into California. By the time that they got to California, John C. Fremont and the Bear Flaggers had already conquered California. So they essentially became constabulary troops. They became the first people who participated in the gold rush. These guys who were scattered across California to maintain the peace suddenly got bit by the gold bug. Technically they were on duty, but they just kind of scattered and went panning for gold, because what else are you going to do in California?
The first Mormon scouts arrived at what's now called the Salt Lake Valley on July 21st, 1847. When Brigham Young first came upon the valley 3 days later, he supposedly said, quote, "This is the right place."
This is the place. Those were the famous words uttered by Brigham Young. When the pioneers came west, they came across this canyon right here, Emigration Canyon. And Brigham Young here pointed out over the Salt Lake Valley, this was indeed supposed to be the place for the new Zion and for Brigham Young to continue to build the church. I like to also think too, let's be honest, this mountain range back here is basically the end of the Rocky Mountains. And to come out of the canyon and be so exhausted, probably came out here and said, you know what, this has got to be the place. I can't continue doing this. There's a big lake over there. Is it the Pacific Ocean? Oh, it's not the Pacific Ocean? Well, let's just say it is. This is the end. Okay, this is the place.
Over the next few years, tens of thousands of Mormon pioneers would pass by the same spot to see their new home. Young planned a city there, naming it, quote, "the city of the Great Salt Lake," after the giant lake nearby. But that was a mouthful, so eventually people just called it Salt Lake City. Yep, that's how it looks like today. I got to spend some time here earlier this year with Mr. Terry M. Laser and the Cynical Historian. It's an awesome city.
Utah it's Brigham Young. It really is. He built this thing. Really, the LDS Church today is the Church of Brigham. Joseph Smith was the big ideas guy. Brigham Young was the guy that put it into action. He was the businessman. He was seen as a caretaker, an organizer, somebody that could do that next phase of the life of Latter-day Saints. But yes, this is his image. But this was a place that was seen as secure, safe, away from any other type of, they hoped, interaction much with the government. We're on South Temple right now. And South Temple was really designed to be sort of the main street for Salt Lake City as envisioned by Brigham Young. We're going to be coming up on his home for his family members. As you keep going miles west here, you also get Governor's Mansion and a lot of other big buildings, but this is really the lifeblood of Old Salt Lake City. All right, right here are two of the oldest buildings here in Salt Lake City, and both are about Brigham Young's life. So on the left here, my left here, this is the Lion House. Now the Lion House was meant to be a large residence for many of Brigham's wives. This could hold basically 20 families at a time. To the right here, this is called the Beehive House. Now this was more specific for him, not just his home, but where he would bring in guests. The beehive and the bee really became a symbol here for early Mormons here in Utah, with the whole idea that bees are industrious. That was really their motto here as they were settling. The first thing I guess you would come and see if you were coming through the valley here is the Beehive House, be met by Brigham Young, and then see all the sights right here. Now the coordinate system here not only is great for finding directions and things, but it actually extends much, much further than Salt Lake City. So everything comes back here. This is 0 west, 0 south, but you can go 20 miles plus south and still be using the same numeric grid system. And I think travelers are really going to like that when they come to Salt Lake City.
In the early years, though, it was a fairly isolated, tight-knit community where people shared most of their crops. Dang communists. Of course, Young planned a big, beautiful temple. It only took 40 years to complete. That's how it looks like today. It's, currently under renovation, in case you couldn't tell. Between 1847 and 1869, approximately 80,000 settlers moved to the Salt Lake Valley, most of them Mormons. Now, keep in mind that the Ute, Goshute, and Shoshone nations all had claims in the area as well. And as more and more Americans came, there were more and more skirmishes between the two groups. Regardless, the Mormons branched out to settle far outside of Salt Lake City, dreaming of creating their own Mormon state called Deseret.
Yeah, so the idea of it, this was going to be called Deseret, like a theocracy, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that was the idea, but again, didn't last too long because this all got eaten up by the United States of America.
Even after that, though, it was pretty isolated for at least a couple decades, right? They kind of did their own thing.
For sure. This was not settled by any means, so they were really trying to build the Zion, this new homeland, really literally out of a desert. This was definitely an island, I guess you would say, of the Mormon community, and that would have been the original reason why you were here. Now, as time has gone on, the state has become definitely more secular. There's still a lot of religious influence here, as you can see with a lot of the local laws, and right here we're at the state capitol here, absolutely dominated by church members in the legislature. But today, in a lot of ways, Salt Lake City is really kind of looking and feeling like almost every kind of American city.
Today, many of the Mormons who live in what's known as the Mormon Corridor can directly trace their ancestry to the first Mormons who settled here in the second half of the 1800s. Congress created Utah Territory as part of the Compromise of 1850. And President Millard Fillmore made, you guessed it, Brigham Young the territory's first governor. Wait, and he also made him superintendent of American Indian Affairs? Ouch. Keep in mind that Young was already the leader of the LDS Church, so we had a little bit of mixing of church and state going on here. Yeah, with Young in charge of both the church and the state, it was basically a theocracy. Young supported legalizing slavery in Utah. And polygamy, of course. And there was the Utah War, aka the Mormon Rebellion, a clash between Mormon settlers in Utah and the federal government lasting from May 1857 to July 1858. Well, it wasn't much of a war, or even much of a rebellion, for that matter. 150 people did die during the conflict, but 120 of those died during the Mountain Meadows Massacre, a paranoid attack on innocent people who just happened to be traveling through Utah. Not a good look, man, when Mormons are killing random people. After the tragedy, Young stepped down from being governor, but would continue to lead the church until his death in 1877. Utah didn't become a state until 1896, mostly because that's how long it took before the Mormons finally agreed to ban polygamy. That said, less than 30% of Mormons actually practiced it before then, and several continued to secretly practice it afterward. By that time, many non-Mormons now lived in Utah. Today, just around 42% of Utah residents are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Still, there is no denying the big influence Mormonism has had on this state. Today, there's more than 70 branches of Mormonism. This map shows every country you can find Mormons. That's pretty impressive, especially considering how it all got started.
There is a lot more to, not just saying Utah history, but Mormon history that is just now really coming out, and it is fascinating. It is a wild story. It's a Game of Thrones type thing. They should make a Game of Thrones style HBO series about early Mormon history. Take it from there to the early Joseph years, bring it all the way to Utah.
There's no way to sugarcoat this. Joseph Smith was basically a con artist, and anyone who says otherwise is trying to whitewash history. Before his untimely death, he had been arrested at least 42 times, according to one source. Everywhere he went, he seemed to attract mob violence and controversy. Still, I argue, Smith had the last laugh. Mormonism is arguably the most successful American-made religion. In fact, today the Latter-day Saint movement is one of the few religious movements gaining members, not losing them. Due to the success of Mormonism, in fact, you could argue that Joseph Smith was one of the most successful con artists in American history. I did a ton of research for this one, but as always, you can check out the sources I used for this video by
checking out the description of this video.
Two books in particular that I think you ought to check out are American Zion by Benjamin Park and American Crucifixion by Alex Beam. Both of these books are also linked below. Thanks to Mr. Terry and the Cynical Historian for contributing to this video, especially Mr. Terry. He went above and beyond, taking me around, teaching me about Utah history, and he read over my script. Be sure to check out both of their channels, but I know there's more to the story. What did I leave out? You bet your bottom dollar you better comment below to let me know all about it. Thanks for staying curious.